let's talk about all the things that we've seen so far. What are the goods and the bads and perhaps the ugly? So I think first of all, let's talk about the sound, because I feel like a lot of people are focused on the sound. Because the sound was already criticized heavily, the devs already confirmed that they are reworking the sound, and there's gonna have different sound design for like hits and stuff like that when the game fully launches. And so honestly, I don't think the sound is a negative. I think it's a positive, because it was bad. They've taken feedback and they're gonna implement it. And so that I think is going to be a positive, even though right now in these presentation it might be seen as a negative. I see it as a positive because they already are confirming that they're taking feedback and implementing it. So I see that as a big positive. When it comes to everything visual, honestly, as much as not all the animations are as fluid as people would like them to be, like in the Souls games, for instance, or From Software game, I also see it as a positive, because the general presentation of like these whole thing, I think, is pretty good, and everything visual related, whether it's like presentation of like assets, HUD, you name it. I think overall, like visually, the game looks amazing. So visually, again, I think the game looks great. Not even to mention the amount of customization for like the character, the armor design, like the different styles of armor. Like we've seen like wolf character, pyromancer, all kinds of knights, warrior, you name it. I feel like everything related to like customization is like on point. If I'm being honest, I think the armor design is way better than Elden Ring, like, to be fair. And not to I just want to give this game's credit where credit is due, right? You know what I mean? Like I really think that visually, like, the artist's work is really top notch here. Okay, so aside from that, we also have some gameplay elements that are very interesting. First of all, the seamless co-op aspect, where you can play the entire game with your buddy seamlessly and just enjoy the game that way, to me is probably one of the biggest positive that the game could have, and one of the biggest reason why I think a lot of people will enjoy their experience, especially more casual players that are not going to have like an in-depth look into the mechanics. Like the average player is not going to care as much about the amount of frames that dodging have. It's going to be like the Factual Life vid we watched earlier. They're just going to have a feel for it. They're not really going to understand like what's going on, but they're going to have a good feel or a bad feel. So at the end of the day, I think when it comes to the co-op aspect, I think that a lot of players are going to have a good feel for the game. Okay, when it comes to more gameplay stuff, there's some good gameplay elements that we've seen so far. One of them is actually the attack combos, and we had confirmation throughout these vids that we watched that you're going to be able to string together attack combos and also switch stance, which means that you're going to have access to more attacks while you're doing like attack strings. So like you're pretty much starting with like X attack, and then you switch stance and follow up with another attack. And even further than that, you're going to be able to implement spell casting in between. So that means that there's a lot of like attack and combo variation that you can pull off with the gameplay. And as much as this could technically be a balance problem in PvP, which is not necessarily a balance problem, we're just going to have to wait and see for that one. I can't really see this being a negative for the PvE, like the fact that you can string so many attack variation together. I think that the PvE portion is going to massively benefit from this for sure. So PvP, we're going to have to wait and see. It could be like a huge positive for the PvP, or it could be a negative if it's not implemented properly. But I think we have to look at this in a positive light, because the more variety of attack you have access to, usually the better. So I see this as a big positive. Right now, I cannot help but watching the footage we have right now. I cannot help but start to talk about some of the negatives. So the negative is definitely has to do with gimmicks, because gimmicks is almost like the name of the game at this point. I feel like every time you watch a new trailer, there's a new gimmick that's introduced. And I'm going to put this in the negative, but I genuinely feel like, this guy's name is IGN, I definitely feel like some of these gimmicks, like for instance, here, you have some parasites when you fight bosses, and having to interact with these parasites with the lamp will debuff the boss while you're fighting. So you have to manage the boss while at the same time you could be ignoring these, or you could be taking care of them. But that kind of introduces like some sort of puzzle aspect to some of these fights, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's like almost think of it as like having like side objectives while you're fighting a boss. And so this could even make team fights a lot more interesting, like fighting with your teammate. One of you guys like take care of the little side objectives while the other guy takes aggro from the boss and whatnot, while you still have to worry about the AoE attacks and whatever. So I don't necessarily see this, for instance, in particular as a negative. I think this looks pretty interesting, and I would be willing to say this is probably a good mechanic at first glance at least. But on the other hand, we have mechanics like the soul flare, I believe they call it. Let's see if we can get a visual here. We have a mechanic like the soul flare. Let me try to grab an instance of it being used. We can find one. There you go here. So you basically yeet out the soul of the enemy, and that's basically a press to win button. So you have limited uses of this, and that's basically how they balance it, because if you didn't have limited uses, that would be completely broken. But at the end of the day, like gimmicks like these, for instance, I don't think are a good thing, no matter how you put it, because mechanics that serve as like free hits like that work in games that are not focused around the combat. So games that don't necessarily prioritize like a tight combat mechanic, or a game where the focus is not really in maneuvering and outplaying your opponents or your enemies. So it works with games like MMOs and stuff like that. But when it comes to a Souls-like game, because this is what this is, a Souls-like game here, yes, these games have many cool elements to it. You know, they have cool worlds, you know, nice story, lore, whatever, you name it. There's a lot of good qualities to these games, but the principal aspect is most definitely the tight combat. And when you have a mechanic like this here, where the whole point of the mechanic is to stop combat and then just being able to cheese your enemy for a short amount of time instead of keeping the fight going. So I see a mechanic like this as taking away from the game instead of adding to the game, because it takes away from the fun aspect that's supposed to be the combat and the focus, which should be around the combat, whereas you're basically just cheesing your enemies here. It reminds me a little bit of an instance where, you know, a Skyrim, for instance. But here's the thing: the Skyrim doesn't have good combat, first of all. But the focus of a game like Skyrim is not around the combat. So your Fus Roda is fun because, you know, it's just goofing around and having fun around like that. When there's a game that has a focus a bit more around the challenge part and the combat, cheese mechanics like that have no place in the game, and in my opinion are a huge detriment to the whole experience. So we see gimmicks like this pretty much throughout the trailer. A big one that's also in your face is definitely going to be the Umbral world versus the Axiom, whatever it's called. So the two worlds intertwined together. I've seen a lot of good positive comments about it. It could be a massive hit. It could add a lot of variety to the map exploration and whatnot, but I'm going to put it into a negative, because one thing that's definitely going to come up over time, we've had it mentioned in some of the vids we watched. It's been said that it could get tedious over time to constantly have to switch and look around with both the lamp and your normal view. So basically, if you want to explore everything and if you don't want to miss anything, you pretty much have to constantly switch between the lamp and the real world. And that could easily get annoying after a few hours of gameplay. So to me, I'm going to put like gimmicks in general, which I put like all of these mechanics into like one baskets. I put them into the negative because I feel like there's too many opportunities for it to be like, I would call it like points of failure where the game could suffer from it, especially with the soul grabbing type of deal. But at the end of the day, I think because there's so many of these gimmicks, some of them are definitely going to be fun. Like for instance, I feel like the parasite mechanic throughout boss fights and enemies, I think to me could be an interesting one. I see this as like a side objective while you're fighting enemies. And that's not necessarily new to games. I feel like that has been done well in the past, which is why I'm more confident about this one in particular. So all in all, I would put the gimmicks into the negative, but we'll have to wait and see for this. It's a bit more ambiguous. I think they could actually pull it off. But yeah, it's going to be a wait and see for this one. Now, when it comes to the ugly, the things that are actually garbage, and I'm not gonna be generous with the words I choose for this. I'm gonna call it other garbage. We're having a case here with this game. You guys remember how badly we criticized From Software when Elden Ring came out and they had Bloodhound Step having crazy iframe and crazy dodge distance. And a lot of people that are used to these games were starting to wonder if From Software understood their own game. That was how bad and out of place and stupidly broken Bloodhound Step was. And we're actually having a case of Bloodhound Step here that we're getting shown at first glance with this game. And let me pull out a good vid that showcases it real quick here. We've had a glimpse, there you go, in the Luigi vid here, where it shows the dodge distance being absolutely insane. So here's the thing. IGN described the dodge as being very generous, and on top of that, we see that the dodge distance is ridiculously long in this. Let me try to grab the clip, and we're going to take a good look at it. Actually, we have some clips here too. Take a look at this, guys. Look at that. Look how the character is not even getting hit here by these attacks. Take a look at all of it like this. This is an early ass roll. Character does not get clipped here. So it's stuff like this that makes you question, like, the iframe timing could really be like way too strong here. Like there could be like way too many iframes, and that's also another comment that's been recurring throughout all these vids that we've been watching, which are all sponsored, by the way. So everyone got flew there to actually play the game. So don't expect people to shit on the game. That would be disrespectful. But since I'm not paid to do any of this, and I really don't care about feelings, I genuinely want the best for the game. Like, genuinely, I want this game to be good. I want From Software to have competition. I want more games to have good gameplay elements. And I definitely want this to succeed. But it has to be said, like, when you have, like, very generous dodge timings like that, it completely destroys the fundamental aspect of the game, which is the timing and also the spacing, which we're going to get to in a second. So when it comes to like the impression that people had, we've heard a lot that a lot of these boss fights seemed easy, and we even heard in this particular vid from Mr. Luigi here that the boss grab felt like it was like too small. But upon looking at the footage further, you tend to realize that this boss grab might not even be too small. It's really because the dodge timing is so generous that no matter what the boss is doing, you're likely going to be in iframe when you're dodging. So one of the biggest red flag that's definitely coming up here is most definitely the dodge. And the reason why it's such a huge red flag is because dodge is such a core fundamental aspect of these games. And if it's not done right, the game is just going to fall apart and going to fail like so massively. And so much so that, let's see if we can find it too. I definitely want to get to the part where we see the dodge distance being all crazy, because there's a sequence here that really showcases well the distance at which the character rolls. I just don't know exactly what time it is. 2:35 is the dodge distance. Thank you guys, much appreciated. Very appreciated. All right. So here you're going to see the distance at which the character rolls out. So see here, in the first gameplay impression, the character that they were showcasing was max level and were on light load. Although now it's been confirmed by the people who've played the game that the dodge distance is indeed extremely large. And let's take a good look at it here. Let's slow it down and watch it properly. So this is the type of distance you're looking at. So when the dodge distance is too large like this, it just trivializes the spacing aspect as well as the timing aspect, because if you dodge for such a large distance like this, you do not need to time your dodge when you're dodging the attack. You can dodge as soon as you think an attack is coming, and by the time your roll is over, you're already too far from for your opponent to catch you. And that can be not only a big issue in PvP, of course that would break PvP, but against any enemy that can trivialize a lot of fights, where you don't need to dodge things in a timely fashion. You can just dodge when you think an attack is coming and you're already out of range safely. So this particular aspect completely destroys a game. Completely, it destroys it. It makes the game feels like shit. And I definitely want the game to not feel like shit. I want the game to be great. And if you guys care about this game, I would highly suggest you guys give some feedback to the devs. I hope these devs take this as good feedback, because I genuinely feel like this could absolutely kill the game. Something like this is just too important, too much of a big deal for it to fly under the radar like that. Anyone who's played Souls games extensively will notice it, and long and behold, almost every vid that we've watched has mentioned the dodge being too generous. So definitely a big negative takeaway from this. So that's one. Now, I know we're still into the negative, but I want to point out something that's positive though, related to the dodge, and something that could technically be a chance at being a saving grace for the dodge timing being extremely generous. Well, I don't think it could be a saving grace for the dodge distance. I think that dodge distance needs to be reduced no matter how you look at it. But it's been mentioned by Ziostorm that there is significant recovery after you do attacks and dodges. So he describes it as an annoying, like, short pause between your actions that prevent the game from being fluid. Personally, I see this as a big positive. Having higher recovery means that you're not going to be overpowered, in a sense that you're not going to be able to cancel out of every action you're doing. Having commitment to your action, whether you attack or whether you dodge, is a good thing, because otherwise there's no way for you to get punished for your mistakes. So this gives a window of opportunity for you to get punished. So the fact that you're not going to be able to spam attacks or dodges as much as you would want is definitely a good thing. So having higher recovery definitely is a positive for this game, and I think it could help a little bit with the dodge. But with that being said, when a dodge has too much iframes, too much invincibility frames, too much of a dodge distance, it will completely break combat. And if the game stays this way, I'm going to predict that the game is going to last probably about a month. I give this game more time than Wu Short, because I feel like the team and everything around the game is just better and better executed than a game like Wu Short. So that's that. Now, finally, with the last massive, disgusting negative that's actually huge garbage as well, we have to talk about it. It's been mentioned in nearly all the videos. Actually, I think it's been mentioned in every single vid we've watched about this game so far. It's the parry being too generous, the parry timing being too generous. And you definitely feel it when you start watching clips of it where the character is blocking. So basically what happens is that everyone has said that the game is very generous with the parry, so you pretty much can block anytime you want, and then you're likely going to perform a parry if it's slightly close to when your enemy was attacking. Some people have compared it to the Sekiro parry, which might be seen as a positive by some, but problem is a Sekiro parry works very well in a game like Sekiro, where the combat is really around stance damage, deflection, and that sort of stuff. It's really not the same type of combat system as this, where this is much closer to a Dark Souls or Bloodborne. And so a parry that's like instant like that has a ton of active frames, can literally trivialize this fight to a point where it's not rewarding and it's not fun. And not only that, because parrying is not its own dedicated action, parrying is also actually blocking. And because parrying is blocking, it takes away even more. See, there's a parry executed there. It takes even more away from the game, because it takes away risk from performing a parry. So not only is your parry timing generous, on top of that, if you mistime it, you can keep your guard up and you're going to be blocking the attack on top of that. So you're looking at something here that's like extremely low risk, high reward, and easy to execute. So really bad implementation of the parry mechanic. I can already see it in all these clips. Everyone has been describing it as too generous, but if we're being realistic about it, if we're not sponsored like these other content creators, we have to say it. The parry is an extremely massive negative at the moment and absolutely needs to be tuned up. And I want this to be good. And the best feedback I could give to these devs is parries and counter mechanics in games like these. You do not want them to be doable on reaction. You want them to be done on prediction. You never want these sort of mechanics to be able to be pulled off just in the blink of an eye, just by reflex. You need to predict the opponent's attack to be able to time it. That's the requirement to have a good parry timing. So you need to take away from the fact that you can just parry stuff on reaction. That will just trivializes the game and make the game feel bad. So this is pretty much all the things I have to say about Lords of the Fallen. Again, it's going to sound very harsh, but at the end of the day, it is very harsh, because I genuinely think that the few things I mentioned there are absolutely massive failure points. Extreme red flags. I cannot stress how actually bad these mechanics are. But with that being said, I definitely want the game to succeed and want the game to be good. My goal in saying this is for the devs to actually address it. I do not want the game to come out like that. The game only has one chance at being delivered and getting into the hands of the players for the first time. It needs to get a good impression. And I genuinely believe that if they tune up that parry timing, reduce the parry window to be shorter, and especially at the start of it, so that you have to do it on prediction. If they do this, if they reduce slightly the iframes you get from dodging, and also reduce the distance from the character that's dodging, if they do all these three things, I think the game is going to be so much better. It's not even going to be comparable. Like, those I feel are probably the most important feedback that I could give to this. This is absolutely genuine feedback. I want From Software to have some competition. And I honestly feel like this game genuinely could be that competition. It's not like these things that are mentioned are necessarily hard to fix either. Like, when we talk about the gimmicks, I don't see these things changing, and we're going to have to accept it how they are. But again, like I said, I don't see them as a huge negative. I think some of them are going to be good, some of them are going to be bad. But when it comes to like parry window, dodge window, dodge timings, those things definitely are easy fixes and definitely need to change. So that's that. So this is pretty much the entire analysis of Lords of the Fallen so far. As hopefully as constructive as it can be, but yeah, at the end of the day, it is what it is. I hope you guys enjoyed this analysis, and I'll catch you guys up later on YouTube, fellas. All right, see you guys.